Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in just a moment. Just leaving some time for everyone to trickle in from the waiting room. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this year's Virtual Visiting Scholar webinar series. My name's Heather Metcalf, and I am the PI for the ARC Network and Director of Research for the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, our home organization for the ARC Network. Today, we're hosting a member of the 5th cohort of our Virtual Visiting Scholars program. This program empowers scholars to complete metasyntheses and meta-analyses of existing literature to address critical issues relevant to equity in STEM. Before we introduce today's guest, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items and provide a brief overview of the ARC network. First, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording with registrants and post it to our ARC network website. Live captioning is available through Zoom. If you hover your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom window, you will see a number of different menu options. To the right is the icon for captioning. Selecting the caret will allow you to customize your captioning experience. In the center are options for Q&A and chat. For the beginning of our webinar, you will only be able to view chat messages from the ARC team. We will also use the chat to share links and resources, as well as our feedback survey. We will open the chat for participants once we finish the prompted part of our discussion. If you have questions for our speaker, please add them to the Q&A. You can also upvote questions within the Q&A. Now to share a bit more about the ARC network. The goal of the ARC network is to create and cultivate a broad community that bridges the gap between researchers and practitioners. As the STEM Equity Brain Trust, the ARC network works to promote systemic change by collecting previous work and producing new perspectives, methods, and interventions through convenings, a curated resource library, emerging research workshops, a virtual visiting scholar program, and online events like this one. The ARC network is built on and works through a framework integrating inclusion, intersectionality, and intentionality. We strive to ensure that our work accounts for the social stratifications that intertwine to determine the unique inequities that folks experience. The ARC network is funded through a cooperative agreement with the NSF Advanced Program with our home organization, the Women in Engineering Proactive Network, or WEPAN. To learn more about the ARC network, we encourage you to visit equityinstem.org, where you can also join the community for free if you haven't already. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at ARC Equity in STEM and hashtag Equity in STEM. Now, ARC Network's Project Director, Virginia Rhodes, will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Heather, and hello, everyone. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Sue Rosser to share her work as a member of the 5th Virtual Visiting Scholars cohort. Dr. Sue Rosser became Provost Emerita at San Francisco State University after serving as a special advisor for research development and external partnerships for academic and student affairs at the Chancellor's Office of the California State University System, and as Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at San Francisco State University. Before that, she was the Dean of the Liberal Arts College at Georgia Institute of Technology, where she held the endowed Ivan Allen Dean's Chair of Liberal Arts and Technology. Her research focuses on theoretical and applied aspects of women, science, health, and technology, and she has authored over 140 journal articles and 14 books, the most recent being Academic Women in STEM Faculty and Breaking into the Lab, Engineering Progress for Women in Science. She has held several grants from the National Science Foundation, including from 2001 to 2006, serving as co-PI on a $3.7 million advanced grant, PI on Intel, Interactive Toolkit for Engineering Learning, Bridge to the Future for GIs, and PI on an IT Catalyst advanced grant. She has served as a member of the External Advisory Board for more than a dozen advanced grants, as well as Senior Program Officer for women's programs at NSF. She served as a Clayman Fellow at Stanford and was on the American Association for the Advancement of Science Executive Board. Dr. Rosser received her BA, MS, and PhD in zoology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now I will turn it over to you, Sue, where you can share about the work that you did as part of this program.
Thank you, Virginia. I'm just getting set up here and hope that folks can see my screen there. I really appreciate the ARCS network. It's been a wonderful opportunity for me to be a visiting virtual scholar and to interact with these folks over the years on a number of other projects. I would also really like to acknowledge my colleagues from Fresno State University who currently have an advanced partnership grant, who are the ones who really led me to want to study the experiences of foreign-born, foreign-trained STEM faculty. The grant that they have has a small portion devoted to the promotion and tenure of foreign-born, foreign-trained STEM faculty, but in interacting with them, and especially since 6 of the 8 co-PIs are foreign-born, foreign-trained women, I began to see how fascinating this topic was, how understudied it was, and also how important it was. So thank you to them. As we get started today, you'll see the outline of my presentation. And I wanted to provide you, in addition to that background about how I got into the project, with a few definitions. The first of these is foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty. Sometimes people ask me, why are you using that term? You know, as if there was something perhaps wrong with it or a little bit offensive. So I would like to mention that although it's often used interchangeably with immigrant faculty or international faculty or even diaspora faculty, the preferred term, according to Akuli, and this was a decision that was made by the community doing this research in 2015, most commonly used in the literature is foreign-born, foreign-trained. Second definition that you'll hear a lot about in this presentation is underrepresented minorities, or URMs. And this study uses the NSF definition of underrepresented minorities, which includes Blacks or African Americans, Hispanics or Latinx, and American Indians or Alaska Natives. You'll notice that it does not include Asians because Asians are not underrepresented in STEM fields relative to their proportion in the overall US population. And I point out that that's different from the US Census Bureau of underrepresented and somewhat different from what NIH and Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, use for certain definitions, such as studying vulnerable populations. Third definition is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Again, I'm using the NSF definition, which, as most of you know, includes many of the social sciences, but does not include the clinical fields within STEM. And then finally, the term intersectionality, which you've already seen on the introductory slides that Heather presented. And this study is framed to be congruent with the NSF recognition and definition of an intersectional perspective. Since foreign-born, foreign-trained status is a social identity, along with gender and race ethnicity, this is more salient in this study. My goals in doing this research were really threefold. First, I wanted to conduct a systematic review and metasynthesis of the existing literature on STEM faculty using intersectional perspectives of gender and race ethnicity and looking at the gaps in the literature regarding the similarities and differences in academic work experiences between foreign-born, foreign-trained, and US-born, US-trained women faculty, as well as foreign-born, foreign-trained men faculty and US-born, US-trained men faculty, or individuals who identify as male. The extent to which US URM definitions prove inadequate and lead to gaps in knowledge about these experiences was something I also wanted to pursue. So there was kind of that dual focus and purpose. Another goal I had was to communicate the results of this metasynthesis in an effort to encourage foreign-born, foreign-trained, and US-born, US-trained faculty to understand the differing perceptions of the experiences they're having in the same workplace, and also to encourage scholars to research some of the gaps in the knowledge which still remain, and administrators to better address some of the shortcomings that are present in the work environment. And I'll be talking about that a good bit at the end. And finally, to recommend policies, programs, and practices that can better enhance the inclusion, career success, and retention of both foreign-born, foreign-trained, and US-born, US-trained faculties of all genders and race ethnicities, based on the information from this metasynthesis. Now, in terms of methods, you may ask, why did I choose metasynthesis compared to, for example, meta-analysis? Those of you who have been experienced in undertaking meta-analyses or metasyntheses may recognize that meta-analysis is better for some purposes and metasynthesis better for others. Most of the international students receiving PhDs that become the academic faculty of STEM departments in the United States are eventually naturalized and become citizens or permanent residents. What this means is that over time, and this usually happens relatively quickly after they receive their PhDs, they can no longer be tracked as foreign-born, foreign-trained because they are considered US citizens or permanent residents. Because of that, a meta-analysis is not particularly good for tracking foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty. They will disappear, especially in terms of any kind of longitudinal studies. Second issue is that metasynthesis allows a systemic review and integration of findings from qualitative studies of smaller numbers. Since I was interested in experiences, I wanted to look at the qualitative studies and really find out what the experiences of individuals were. And then finally, metasynthesis permits the use of so-called gray literature. So that includes findings from many of the professional societies. Also, very importantly, and that was leaned upon quite heavily, from dissertations and theses, so that they have not necessarily yet been peer-reviewed and published. In terms of the initial databases that were selected, you'll see in this Prisma diagram that there were articles both from databases and from websites. So I looked at over 3,297 pieces of literature. The initial databases that I was looking at were Springer, Wiley, Web of Science, Sociological Abstracts. You can see them written out here. Women's Studies International, Race Relations Abstracts, ProQuest, Theses Global, as well as databases from professional societies. Much to my amazement, the professional society databases were not particularly helpful. On the other hand, I had missed in my initial thinking about this and preliminary search to write the proposal, the fact that the education journals in higher ed carried much of the research on this topic. And so the Wiley Education Journals, EBSCO, Taylor and Francis books and journals became very important for that. In terms of initial keywords, I've already suggested this a good bit during the definitions. I looked at 4 fields. The first was foreign-born or international, combined with, or so the second is and STEM faculty, combined with, or and gender or women, combined with, and the fourth and final one is URM or race ethnicity. When I put all those keywords in, all 4 sets of them, it yielded 0 or 1 result from many of these databases. The major difficulty was URM. Even in the quantitative studies, very few actually looked at race ethnicity. And if so, they did not intersect it with gender, or perhaps they didn't intersect it with STEM. The initial inclusion criteria that I used were published between 2001 and 2021. So a 20-year period. I will note, and I'll come back to this perhaps at the end, that excluded a couple of things. First of all, there's not much in the literature about COVID because it did not begin, as you know, until 2020. And so to get publications out. And secondly, the China initiative and some of the problems resulting from that had not really been recognized or gotten underway yet. Second inclusion criterion was includes qualitative data. Although I should mention that I did look at quantitative articles. In the final 99 articles that I read, assessed very carefully, some 58 of them were quantitative. I didn't use these in the final meta-synthesis. However, I did use them for background and discussion. And if you read the paper that I wrote about this for the ARC website, some of it is included there. Then also the studies needed to be published in English for inclusion, utilize a US-based sample in US higher education, include tenure track STEM faculty or tenured, and then including peer-reviewed articles, books, dissertations, conference presentations. And then finally, the initial exclusion criteria were foreign-born or international faculty in medical schools. I did not look at medical schools. Second, foreign-born researchers at universities who are not defined as faculty, and there's a large group of these individuals. Also, foreign-born researchers outside of academic institutions, for example, employed by government or employed by corporations. And again, I live very close to Silicon Valley. There's a large number of individuals that would fall into that category. So, as I indicated, the initial searches yielded 3,287 articles. I'm going to go back actually to the prior one, and or other literature, 2,531 from databases, and then 756 from other sources. Removing the duplicates and applying most of the initial exclusion criteria, with the exception of some of the problems with the URM, I came down to 99 articles. 75 were from databases and 24 from other sources. Then the ones that used qualitative or mixed methods were assessed further for determination of whether they would be included in the final review. I got rid of the 58 quantitative articles, except for the introductory part. And eventually I came down to 30 qualitative or mixed method articles. Some of the other ones were excluded for a few reasons that you might find of interest. For example, of the 11 that were excluded that weren't duplicates or quantitative, 5 really, when I looked at them more closely, were not about STEM faculty. 1 turned out to really be quantitative on closer analysis. 1 included only Black African men, with no comparison to Black African women in the US or to US-born, US-trained men or women. 1 didn't really look at foreign-born, nor was it intersectional. 1 wasn't US-based. 1 was focused on Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico. So they, of course, are not really foreign-born, since Puerto Rico is part of the United States. And then finally, 1 didn't separate US-born and foreign-born results. So after doing all that, I came down to several articles that allowed closer reading. I used some of the quantitative information to help me decide on categories. And I came up with 6 broad findings. And I'd really like to focus much of the presentation on what these were. You can see them here, but I'm going to go over each of them individually with quotations from the literature so that you get some idea of what people were really saying. Let the women foreign-born faculty speak for themselves. So the first major finding is that foreign-born women appear to have different experiences than either foreign-born men or than US-born women and men. As a few pieces of literature made the point, and I think those of you who study gender and also who study underrepresented minorities will recognize the foreign-born women, of course, experience some of the issues that US-born women experience in STEM in terms of smaller numbers, being isolated, and so on, depending on the field. Particularly the foreign-born women of color experience issues that underrepresented minorities experience. And then, of course, you have the intersection if they're foreign-born women of color. So this first quotation that you see is from a woman who is African. And she talked about the fact that she spoke in a slightly different accent because she was from Africa. And you'll hear a lot about accents and how important that is in the teaching facet. And she said that at first students appeared disinterested when they started the class. And then they were amazed at where she gained her knowledge in chemistry because their image of Africa was that it was a poor, struggling country with her nationals killing one another. And as she said, I had to explain several times that Africa is a continent of 54 countries. Another individual who was a foreign-born woman of color says, when we depend on colleagues' kindness and humanity alone, minority women really face issues and succeed by chance. This was an Asian immigrant woman of color. And then another issue common for US-born women who have the dual career situation, and there was some literature on dual career foreign-born faculty of color. A lot of the women marry with people senior to them. And this is particularly true because there's a substantial portion of the foreign-born women who initially enter the United States on a visa via their husband. And so in many cases, their husband, of course, gets the job, gets more advanced in his career. And so she falls further and further behind because his professorship is always more important than her assistant professorship. Also, of course, if they're doing family financial planning, they favor the individual often who can make more money. A second overall finding, and I'm going to break this one down a bit, is that foreign-born faculty tend to have different workload assignments than US-born faculty. First of all, with regard to teaching, as I'll show in the next slide when I talk about research, Initially, at least, and there are some caveats with regard to this, the foreign-born faculty have better research records than US-born faculty upon being hired into tenure-track positions. Many of them have more publications. They may have had more time in industry or in other research and government work. So sometimes they are hired because of their research expertise and they're assigned graduate teaching rather than undergraduate teaching. And so that usually generates fewer credit hours. But then also there is this evidence of students selecting against foreign-born faculty, particularly faculty that they perceive as having accents. And that this is really a problem, especially for the Asian foreign-born faculty. So here's a quotation from an individual who said, "I had a problem with accents and students reflected that in their review. But of course, that was important for tenure and promotion." So the solution this individual came up with was to go to Toastmasters Club to increase public speaking. Now, one of the issues is that sometimes this selection against foreign-born faculty actually transfers to US-born Asian American faculty who may have no accent whatsoever, but the students see their name and they think they will, so they won't sign up for their classes. Or there have even been cases documented in the literature of students claiming they have accents when they do not. So this is, some discrimination and problem. The second quotation is somebody who is African, but spent a great deal of time in the European education system. And this highlights another problem, is that in other parts of the world, the education system is quite different than in the US. And they talk about the fact that in Europe and Africa, there's no kindness there. But here, professors lower standards to please the students. Here, a school is like a business where the students are customers. And that's not the case in most European countries where education is free or almost free, and they favor competence. So this can lead to quite an adaptation in teaching style that foreign-born faculty face. Another workload issue has to do with research. As I mentioned, upon hire, most of the foreign-born faculty have a better research productive schedule. Now, this may change given that now there are more faculty hired in teaching-focused institutions. But even though the faculty have better track records, there are some challenges from being international. It prevents people, until they become a US citizen, from being able to apply for different grants. So as they point out, you can have your good research to win that award, but without that paperwork, i.e. The citizenship or permanent residency, you can't apply for them. So they've missed quite a few opportunities because of that. In order to maintain their positions, of course, they often need to publish, they need to receive tenure, which is perhaps dependent on their research. So that puts them in a kind of very tough position. And this second quotation, the person realized is not just doing the research, but there's this whole issue of visibility. And that all these kinds of things come into play for promotion and tenure and for moving up in the career. And she talks about the fact that this is when the cultural differences really start to make a difference when coming up for tenure and promotion. Then also there's an issue with regard to service, the third stool in the tenure and promotion criteria at most institutions. It's been shown over and over, actually, that the foreign-born faculty don't necessarily do less service or have fewer committee assignments, but it's often less so-called significant service, especially service that leads to leadership positions or tracking into chair, dean, provost, president, that sort of thing. So for example, as the first quotation here suggests, this person constantly gets assigned to do service on International Day, for example, where she is expected to dress up in an outfit from her country of origin, perhaps bring food from that country. And, you know, she doesn't like that. It reinforces the difference and makes it purely a matter of culture. The second individual quoted here says that now when she looks back, back at her career, she can see a lack of leadership. She recognized you not only have to be a good teacher and researcher, but the third part is leadership. So not just being on too many committees, but ones that are important, hiring committees, tenure and promotion, and so on. And you have to decide how to become a chair. And in addition, she said this is difficult not only for foreigners, but also for women in particular from certain cultures who are raised in a traditional role. In her case, she says to be a little violent. And again, the accent issue comes in. She said, you know, for a long time, she was afraid to open her mouth, even in departmental meetings, because there would be the whole issue of accent. So the women fail to develop the skills of how to run a meeting, how to be a leader. The next finding has to do with the fact that initially foreign-born faculty tended to cluster in R1 institutions, or the so-called research-intensive institutions. But they're now also increasingly in regional universities and community colleges. And to help folks, particularly who are outside of academia, understand this, who are on this webinar, 70% or more of faculty in certain STEM departments, for example, computer science, many of the engineering departments, even physics, somewhat chemistry and mathematics, are foreign-born, foreign-trained. So in terms of the large bulk of faculty, particularly initially in many R1 institutions, we are talking about foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty. The initial group of people who came after World War II, and of course that's outside the framework of this study, were from Western Europe after the fall of Nazism and World War II. Then there was a group that came after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the former Soviet Union. Then there was the Iranian revolution, and that had enabled another, or push-pull, I'll talk about that in a few minutes, group of individuals to come. And then in 1990, there was a major change in immigration law, which permitted many, many more students, particularly from Asia. And the largest number of foreign-born faculty come, number 1 from China, number 2 from India, and number 3 from South Korea. And so it's those individuals who receive their PhDs in the United States after having their undergraduate training elsewhere, who often stay to become these faculty. And now in regional universities, such as the California State University System and community colleges, the foreign-born faculty are, again, the overwhelming majority of certain departments in computer science, engineering, and so on. So here, one of the faculty members talks about gender bias in STEM fields and how she has understood this. And she is at a 2-year college, and she's working on the biases that exist. She's from the former Soviet Union, actually. And so in the way she teaches math, she's incorporating, these changes. And then this individual actually clearly wanted to be at an R1 university, but says, my university will not sponsor a green card till I get tenure. Therefore, I am not eligible for funding from either NSF or NASA compared to American colleagues. So she had to take a job which emphasizes teaching 13 to 18 credit hours per semester because of that. So this is partially what's driving some of that. Another finding is that immigration policies have a significant impact upon the numbers and the percentages of who becomes foreign-born faculty in the US. So I've already hinted at this when I talked about the waves of immigration, but it's kind of a push-pull situation. There's the issue pushing in terms of what is going on in their country. Did they come because there was political unrest? Was it just economic search for better situation? What was that? And then the pull in terms of what the US immigration policy is and who is let into the United States and permitted to stay. So the first individual you see came from Iran and talks about, we came here to get an education and really intended to go back, but then things changed. The revolution came, then their personal life changed, kids came along, and that became the home. And this became the home in the US. And last time she went home was 5 years ago. A second individual here is talking about the whole problem with visas. And this is really a big issue, immigration. And I'll talk about this in terms of policies and what can be done. But here she was here, and then something called visa retrogression happened. And that date for which it was current went back 5 years. And so they extended the time then for people from India and China so that it took 10 years rather than 5 years for them to get green cards and apply for citizenship or US permanent residency. And then a related issue is when the visa comes through. Even though this woman was from a European country, she was supposed to start her position in September, and somehow her visa was lost in the mail. And so what it meant is that someone else started teaching her class. By the time she came in mid-semester, of course, the students were not thrilled to have a new professor who had different, perhaps, approaches and so on. And so it hurt her teaching evaluations, which are very important, of course, in promotion and tenure. A fifth finding is that retention of foreign-born faculty, especially the women, depends partly on their integration into the broader community as well as the university. And although this is important for foreign-born men faculty, it's especially important for the foreign-born women faculty in STEM, because often they're the only woman in their department or one of two, very small numbers. So the integration into the broader community can be very important for helping them to get to know other women in the community. Also, it can be very important for their children. The first quotation here is from a woman who talks about the men going out for coffee from her department, and they have dinner parties at their houses, and they don't invite her. And as the only woman in her department, she's isolated in ways that, okay, maybe it seems informal that she doesn't get invited to these social occasions. But of course, these are the same individuals who are voting on her promotion and tenure. And you know that a great deal of information is transmitted at the times of these social, so-called informal interactions about what makes a difference in promotion and tenure. And then the second individual talks about how important it was to have other people from her country of origin so that they can understand how to communicate. It wasn't until she started talking to them and she would be invited to their houses for dinner and for parties and so on, that she started feeling more confident speaking English and talking to other people. I would say it's especially important for women too, particularly if they are in rural areas. You'll find that most of the foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty prefer to be in urban areas, and that's because there's usually a larger community outside of the university to whom they can relate. Whereas in rural areas, maybe the only foreign-born individuals, or only at least foreign-born professional individuals, are at the university. And that can be a problem for the men, but particularly tough for the women. And even though there may be a large percentage of foreign-born women who have come, say, with their husbands who are in the university, if it's a large university, they may not be professional, or they may not even be able to work because of the visa situation. So it puts the woman in STEM in a very isolating situation. Also, in some of the rural areas, foreign-born faculty of color in particular face racial discrimination, as do their children. So that's a particularly complicated issue for foreign-born women faculty of color. And then the final finding, a broad finding, is that the pull of family, both from the country of origin, makes foreign-born faculty feel they are not at home in either the country of origin or the United States. So this is particularly true at times of, marriage, birth, death. I think during the COVID situation, which again, this study did not cover, it was predominant for many people. They could not go home for several years to their country of origin. And so this individual talks about putting down more roots in the last 5 years than in the earlier time. And that she could say, honestly, more than 50% of the time was still with the family in India. And finally, she found her emotional framework in the United States. The second one talks about issues with her parents. This is an Asian woman faculty. And she said, right now they come to visit us and stay for a couple of months. They love it. So far, it's been good. But what about when they get older and need more care? Then what should she do? So this push-pull, and that's a definite issue for the faculty of color and foreign-born faculty in general. Now, I want to shift just a bit to suggested policies and practices based on these findings. And I'll be very eager to hear other ideas that you have on suggested policies and practices that come to your mind, either from your own experience or from what you're hearing in this webinar. First, for colleges and universities, I suggest adding to new faculty orientation the issues and challenges that foreign-born faculty may face. And by this, I mean to the new faculty orientation for everyone. Don't make a separate new faculty orientation for foreign-born faculty. But it's important to have US-born faculty understand the issues that the foreign-born faculty are facing, as well as for foreign-born faculty to understand the overall issues and that US-born faculty face. Second, mentoring came up over and over one way or another in the literature. And of course, it's important for all faculty, but to ensure that each foreign-born faculty member has at least one mentor, including an individual who was foreign-born. Because, as the third point suggests, immigration issues feature large. And so it's very important that help and guidance be given with immigration issues. Ideally, every department chair or certainly every dean knows the issues surrounding immigration, but they can be complex and they do change. So the important thing is that the chair and or the dean knows who the go-to person is at the university or the college, who hopefully is informed, because we've heard horror tales of foreign-born faculty who really got the wrong information from their college or university, and that sets back their path to permanent residency or citizenship. And then finally, as already mentioned, it's important to recognize the potential social isolation and provide opportunities to increase social interaction with colleagues. This is especially crucial for women faculty, as I mentioned, and particularly important for faculty who are foreign-born that are outside of urban areas. Now, these are some suggested policies and practices based on the metasyntheses for the federal government agencies, such as National Science Foundation. First, I think the definition of URM really needs to be overhauled. As I mentioned, it fails to include Asians at all. And actually, in some cases, this is a sort of male-based definition in some cases, because in some fields, Asian women actually are underrepresented compared to their male colleagues, or compared to the overall US population of Asians. Second major problem is that it lumps all Asians from different countries together. So we're talking about people from widely different countries and cultures. And there are some countries that are Asian where there is not at all overrepresentation in STEM fields. For example, the Hmong population exemplifies that. A third issue is that when foreign-born faculty become citizens or permanent residents, they are then put into the database as African Americans or Hispanics. So, for example, a Black African who becomes a US citizen is classified as African American. Although she or he may have experienced racism, it is not necessarily the same sort of racism that African Americans growing up in the United States experience. Furthermore, and a similar situation happens with Hispanics. For example, someone from Spain who becomes a US citizen is classified as Hispanic or Latinx, which is not appropriate either. The issue then also is problematic from the point of view of US goals, which is to increase the number of US-born African Americans and Hispanics in the STEM population. So it really cuts both ways. Fourth issue is, as I mentioned previously, it doesn't correspond with definitions used by the US Census Bureau. So this is confusing for people even applying for grants, but certainly for the general population as a whole. And finally, in my opinion, it needs to be consistent across federal agencies and with the US Census. Then I wanted to talk just a little bit about the whole issue of federal policies and their impact on the immigration and probably the future workforce in the United States. As I have mentioned, in many STEM departments, particularly computer science, engineering, physics, chemistry, mathematics to a certain extent, foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty are the vast majority of faculty. Given what has happened with the China initiative and the current situation between the United States and China, this puts the US really in jeopardy a bit in terms of its workforce. It's going to have rolling impacts on undergraduate enrollment, which we already saw the impacts of some of that during COVID, although the international enrollment has been springing back. In graduate enrollment, you saw for the first time this year that India outpaced China for new graduate students. So that's a change, which probably is due to this chilling effect of the China initiative and US-Chinese relationships. STEM workforce, including academia, will ultimately be impacted. And of course, the impact will be uneven across disciplines. This is because of the fact, as I mentioned, it's more concentrated in the computer science, engineering, and the physical sciences, somewhat in the biological sciences, but not at all at those levels. And although a large number of graduate students receive their PhDs in behavioral social sciences, most of them return to their country of origin. And so there are not as many in behavioral social sciences who become tenure track faculty. So I think this is something that needs to be monitored, not to mention the fact that the China initiative caused tremendous disruption in the lives of many very productive faculty from China. So that concludes my formal presentation. I'm very eager to hear your comments and questions. I just wanted to again thank the ARC network, and you've already seen Heather's presentation about this. So I will stop my screen share and go back and be willing to, more than willing to take questions. So Virginia, are you going to be monitoring this?
I will. And so far, we don't have any from the audience, but I will welcome everyone to put any questions they have into the Q&A for Sue. And while we're waiting on them, I can ask you, Sue, first of all, great presentation, wonderful work.
Thank you.
You covered so much in just this short period of time, I feel like. And I want to ask you, what do you think was the most surprising thing you came across doing this research?
I think the most surprising thing to me is how understudied this is. Really, there are amazing areas that have not been explored at all. For example, as I hinted, now the foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty are quite predominant in the same fields as the R1s, but in the regional comprehensive universities, in community colleges, almost no research has been done on those groups. And that's partly because a matter of time and a time lag, but also because a great deal of the research that has been done is in this so-called gray literature of dissertations and theses. And I think, frankly, some of the people undertaking it studied the people at their own university, or they studied, the faculty at other institutions, such as the one where they were receiving their PhD. So very little is known about the experiences of the faculty in the more teaching focused institutions. So whether some of these things would hold up, the findings from research institutions with this faculty who are hired to be particularly focused on teaching is not at all clear. Might be quite a different profile, I think.
Yeah. Question from the audience here. So how might you further disseminate this rich information to those who can better support and need to better understand the experiences of the faculty you studied?
Well, I appreciate that question. I have already started doing some of that. So for example, I gave a presentation to the 23 science deans in the California State University system, also a separate presentation to the engineering deans in that same system. I did present at one international conference in Atlanta that was focused on innovation in science and technology. And then, of course, at the ARC's convening at Duke last year. And quite a few people are interested in the topic, but again, and then 2 weeks ago, at my own home institution, I was invited to be a distinguished speaker. And although I think when the invitation was sent a year ago, they expected something else, I devoted most of it to talking about this. And so a lot of people said to me afterwards, I hadn't really thought about it. I didn't know much about this topic. Very interesting, although they're quite versed more in the gender URM issues for the US born and trained faculty.
And I do want to encourage the audience too to read your full report and to share it with their own networks as well, so they can get the full thing there that covered a lot. Another question for you is, someone's asking you to advise on how we might discern foreign-born faculty when using institutional data.
So this is a real problem, and this is why the quantitative data are not too reliable. I already acknowledged my terrific colleagues at Fresno State University, and that's one thing that we're grappling with in that grant. Because the California State University system will collect all kinds of other data, and we can get intersectional data on race, ethnicity, and gender, and so on. We're having to, they do not collect it on foreign-born, foreign-trained, although from hiring we can often tell, but we're having to rely on self-report of the faculty. And so, as you know, that is not always the best way to get the most reliable data. So we have to ask those faculty, would you say that this is, how do you classify yourself? And then can we use this and intersect? And of course, for a whole variety of reasons, some individuals are unwilling to do that. And that's perfectly understandable. But yes, it's very difficult to receive that information.
Let's see. So this is a little long one, but Monica from our audience here thought the quote about foreign university professors not caring about their students conforms to their experience and observations over 30 years there and abroad. And they say, yes, there is the student consumer problem, but really the US is much more concerned about using its university system to improve opportunities, and especially for underrepresented minority students. The rest of the world has not gotten the memo, in their opinion, and so the attitudes of some or many foreign-born faculty about US-born students, and particularly URM students, is definitely part of the underrepresentation problem. They realize this is a third rail type of question, but they want to get your opinion on this thought.
Yes, I do recognize what you're talking about, and I agree to a certain extent that that is true. I mean, to, a fairly substantial extent that that is true. However, as we all know, there have been quite a few studies lately showing extreme grade inflation in the United States, and that some of the pressure, or what you might call positive moves in the direction that Monica is talking about from the US, have resulted in what might be called unintended consequences. So the whole student success movement, which of course is a big thing in the California State University system and something of which I approve, overall, I think has, and across the country, has resulted in grade inflation. That's been showing up quite a bit. And so there's, I'm not sure we've hit the right tenor on that, and particularly with the decrease in student enrollment that is now occurring around the country. We have the so-called enrollment cliff, which began to be manifest first in the Northeast and then the Midwest. We're now finally getting it in the West, less so in the South. But that puts a lot of pressure, because some institutions, especially smaller institutions, are facing enrollment pressures. And so how that plays out with the grade inflation and success, it's a tricky way to walk the tightrope, I would say. That's my opinion.
Yep. So it looks like we've got time for maybe 1-2 questions, see how many we can squeeze in here. So are there any universities or university systems in the forefront in dealing proactively to improve the way in which foreign-born or foreign-trained faculty are supported?
I think it's mostly an understudied, under-recognized problem. I do think in a couple of areas. So I know that Northeastern University, Catherine Zippel there has done some work, particularly on the research side, and the foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty. And at Northeastern, they have also had a lot of research collaborations back and forth, and actually with campuses. So in that area, I'm not sure about the situation in the teaching in the classroom there and what is going on. So I would mention that. I think there are some others who have begun to look at it and to consider what to do, but I would hate to point out a super exemplar. In my opinion, I did not find one at this point. Maybe someone in the audience is aware of that and, you know, such an institution, and can really put that in the chat.
And squeeze in one last question here. So what is the future direction of your work from this data set?
Well, so I'm sort of trying to figure out what to do. You know, I will probably write, I'll definitely write it up for publication beyond the ARC's website paper that is up there. I'm trying to just think about the best placement for that. I would welcome comments on what that would be like. I've toyed with the idea, but I'm not sure a publisher would be interested, of having some foreign-born, foreign-trained faculty actually tell their experiences in an edited book. And again, I'm not sure, I haven't explored that at all, but it strikes me that would be interesting, be much more interesting to hear it from their point of view than from, you know, this meta synthesis, which is interesting, but doesn't really have that first, what would you say, first person intimacy and urgency that women themselves can tell who have gone through the experience.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation and answering these wonderful questions. I'll turn this over to Heather, who will close us out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia, and thank you, Sue. We are grateful for your dedication to driving change and for the work that you've done on this project. And thank you for being part of our virtual visiting scholar program. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you to our attendees for joining us today. Before we head out, we just have a couple of announcements. As always, it's very helpful when people provide feedback, and we ask that you, if you have the time, please fill out the brief survey about your experience in today's webinar. The link is in the chat. We will also be hosting our next and final cohort 5 member from the virtual visiting scholar program, Dr. Erin Winterraud, on December 13th at 3 p.m. And the registration link is in the chat if you care to join us for that. We also wanted to let you know that the ARC Network Community Survey is out, and you can win a free registration to the 2024 Advanced Equity and STEM Community Convening. For completing that survey, your input is really quite critical to the work that we do. So if you don't mind taking the time to complete that survey, it would be very